The palace square was wide and bright under the afternoon sun. Tourists gathered from many countries to see the royal guards standing in perfect formation. The guards wore clean uniforms and tall hats that shined under the light. They stood still like stone figures and did not react to noise or movement. People whispered and pointed while holding cameras high. Children stood on tiptoes to see better. The air was full of excitement and curiosity. One guard stood near the main gate and his name was Leo. Leo had served the palace for many years. He came from a simple family and believed deeply in duty and respect. Every morning he trained his body and mind to remain calm. He knew the rules of his position very well. A royal guard must not move unless ordered. A royal guard must not react to insults. A royal guard must protect the honor of the palace above all else. Leo stared straight ahead while the crowd moved around him. Some tourists waved their hands in front of his face. Some tried to tell jokes to make him smile. Others stood close just to test his patience. Leo stayed calm and still. His breathing was slow and controlled. His thoughts stayed focused on his duty. Among the crowd stood a man named Mark. Mark was a rich tourist who loved attention. He wore expensive clothes and shiny shoes. His watch glittered as he lifted his hand. He spoke loudly and laughed often. He wanted everyone to notice him. He believed money gave him power everywhere he went. Mark looked at the guards and smiled in a proud way. He told people near him that guards were only there to impress visitors. He said they were not real soldiers. Some people felt uncomfortable and stepped away. Others watched quietly. Mark walked closer to the guard line. A nearby officer calmly asked him to stay behind the barrier. Mark waved his hand and ignored the warning. He stepped forward again. His voice grew louder. Cameras slowly turned toward him. Mark stopped right in front of Leo. He leaned forward and stared at the guard's face. Leo could smell the strong scent of expensive perfume. Leo did not move. His eyes stayed forward. His body remained firm. Mark laughed and called the guard boring. He said the guard looked like a statue. People around them became silent. Some tourists lowered their phones. Others continued recording. Mark moved even closer. He raised his chin and spoke in a mocking tone. He said no one could touch him. He said rules were for poor people. The crowd felt uneasy. A woman pulled her child back. Then Mark did something that shocked everyone. He spat directly onto Leo's face. The sound was small but clear. The crowd gasped loudly. Time seemed to slow down. The spit rolled down Leo's cheek. His face remained still. His posture stayed perfect. He did not wipe his face. He did not blink. He did not speak. People waited for a reaction. Some expected anger. Some expected shouting. Some expected force. Nothing happened. Mark laughed loudly and raised his arms. He looked around proudly. He believed he had proven his power. He believed nothing would happen to him. Behind the palace walls someone important was watching. From a high window the incident was seen clearly. Guards inside the palace exchanged looks. A message was quietly sent. Leo continued standing still. His heart beat fast but his training held him steady. He remembered why he joined the guard. He remembered his family and his oath. He remembered that dignity was stronger than anger. The crowd slowly realized something serious was happening. Silence spread across the square. Mark's laughter faded when no one joined him. The palace doors remained closed for now. But unseen wheels had begun to turn. What happened next would change everything for Mark and for the silent guard who never moved. The silence in the palace square grew heavier with every passing second. People stopped talking and even the sound of footsteps seemed to fade. Mark slowly lowered his arms when he realized no one was laughing with him. His smile weakened as he noticed the faces around him had changed. Many tourists looked uncomfortable. Some shook their heads. Others stepped back as if they wanted no part in what had just happened. Leo remained still at his post. The spit dried on his skin under the warm sun. His training guided him to ignore discomfort. Inside his chest his heart beat faster, but his face showed nothing. He focused on the distant flag above the gate and counted his breaths to stay calm. Years of discipline held him steady. Inside the palace building, a senior officer named Paul watched the scene through a large window. Paul had served the royal household for decades. He believed deeply in honor and order. When he saw what happened, his expression hardened. He did not shout or rush. He simply turned and gave a quiet instruction to the guard beside him. Messages moved quickly through the palace halls. No alarms sounded. No public reaction appeared. Everything remained calm on the surface. But the system behind the walls was now active. Mark began to feel uneasy. He looked around and noticed several officers standing closer than before. They did not touch him. They did not speak loudly. They simply watched him carefully. Mark tried to laugh again, but the sound felt weak. He told himself that nothing serious could happen. He reminded himself of his wealth and influence. He believed he could solve any problem with confidence and charm. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Leo once more. Leo did not look back. A soft voice came from behind Mark. An officer politely asked him to step aside for a moment. The tone was calm and respectful. Mark frowned and asked why. The officer repeated the request without changing his voice. People nearby leaned closer to listen. Phones were raised again. Mark felt pressure building in his chest. He tried to refuse, but the officer remained patient and firm. Mark followed the officer a few steps away from the crowd. Another officer joined them. Their movements were slow and controlled. No one touched Mark. No one raised their voice. Paul continued watching from the window. He nodded slightly when he saw the officers escort Mark aside. He trusted their training. He knew the palace did not need force to handle disrespect. Leo stood alone again at the gate. The crowd now watched him with new eyes. Some felt admiration. Some felt guilt for recording instead of intervening. A few whispered about how calm the guard remained. Inside Mark's mind thoughts raced. He wondered if he had gone too far. He tried to speak loudly again, but the officers gently asked him to lower his voice. Their calm made him feel smaller. The officers asked for his identification. Mark hesitated but handed it over. One officer examined it carefully, while the other maintained eye contact. Their expressions showed no anger, only seriousness. Time passed slowly. Mark shifted his weight and cleared his throat. The confidence he carried earlier felt distant now. He glanced back at the palace gate, hoping to see the situation end quickly. Paul received a brief report through his earpiece. He listened and then gave another short instruction. His voice remained steady. He believed consequences should be measured and fair. Back at the gate, Leo remained unmoved. Sweat formed beneath his uniform, but his posture stayed perfect. He remembered his first day of training and the instructor's words about dignity. He held onto those words now. The crowd murmured quietly. Some tourists apologized to each other for witnessing something so disrespectful. A man near the front shook his head and said the guard deserved respect. A woman wiped her eyes as she watched Leo stand silently. Mark felt his face grow warm. He realized people were no longer impressed by him. Their attention no longer fed his pride. Instead, he felt exposed and judged. An officer calmly explained that Mark's actions had been recorded and reviewed. The officer spoke slowly using simple words. He said the palace expected respect from all visitors regardless of status. Mark tried to interrupt, but the officer gently raised a hand and continued speaking. The calm authority in the voice made Mark listen. The officer told Mark he would need to leave the palace grounds. There was no shouting. There was no humiliation. Only clear consequences. Mark looked around and saw cameras pointed at him, not with excitement but with disappointment. He felt a knot form in his stomach. He glanced once more at Leo. The guard still did not move. That silence felt louder than any punishment Mark had imagined. As Mark was escorted away from the main square, the crowd slowly parted. Some people lowered their phones. Others whispered about respect and pride. Leo remained at his post as the palace gates closed behind Mark. The square slowly returned to its usual noise, but something had changed. From the window, Paul watched Leo and felt a quiet sense of pride. He knew the guard had shown true strength. What Mark did not know yet was that this moment would follow him far beyond the palace walls. And what Leo did not know was that his silent discipline had just earned him something far greater than praise. The palace square slowly returned to normal after Mark was taken away. Tourists whispered among themselves, and many felt embarrassed for watching quietly earlier. Some people left while others stayed and stared at Leo with new respect. The guard continued standing still as if nothing had happened. His face was calm, and his eyes remained forward. Inside the palace, Paul walked through a long hallway lined with portraits of past leaders. He thought about the meaning of duty and restraint. He believed that true strength was shown through control rather than noise. He decided that Leo deserved recognition, but not in a public way. Later that day, Leo was quietly relieved from his post. Another guard took his place without ceremony. Leo followed an officer through a side entrance into the palace. He felt nervous but kept his posture straight. He wondered if he had done something wrong. The officer led Leo into a simple room with a wooden table and 2 chairs. Paul entered a moment later and nodded respectfully. Leo saluted and stood silently. Paul asked Leo to sit and spoke in a calm voice. Paul told Leo that many people had seen his behavior. He said the palace valued discipline and dignity above all else. He explained that Leo had shown perfect control under pressure. Leo listened without speaking. Paul asked Leo about his training and his family. Leo answered honestly and simply. He spoke about learning patience from his father and responsibility from his mother. He said he believed respect was stronger than anger. Paul nodded slowly as he listened. He said moments like the one in the square revealed true character. He told Leo that many guards would have reacted emotionally. He said Leo had protected the honor of the palace without force. Leo lowered his eyes and said he only followed his training. He said his duty mattered more than his feelings. Paul smiled slightly at the answer. Meanwhile, Mark sat alone in a quiet room away from the palace. His phone buzzed constantly with messages and alerts. Videos of the incident had spread quickly. People online criticized his behavior and questioned his character. Mark felt confused and frustrated. He tried to explain himself to friends, but few responded. Some messages were cold and short. Others expressed disappointment. Mark realized that wealth could not shield him from public judgment. Back at the palace, Paul finished his conversation with Leo. He stood and shook Leo's hand firmly. He told Leo that his service would not be forgotten. He said the palace needed people like him. Leo returned to his quarters that evening. He removed his uniform slowly and sat on his bed. The events of the day replayed in his mind. He felt tired but proud. He thought about how close he had been to reacting and how important his training had been. Outside the palace, the story continued to spread. News channels spoke about respect and discipline. Commentators praised the guards' restraint. Many people said the moment reminded them of the importance of self-control. Mark watched the coverage from his hotel room. He felt smaller with every passing hour. The confidence he once carried felt empty. He began to understand the weight of his actions. The next morning, Leo returned to duty. His fellow guards greeted him with quiet respect. No one spoke loudly about the incident. They all understood what he had done. The bond among them felt stronger. Paul observed from a distance and felt satisfied. He believed the palace had handled the situation with dignity. He believed the lesson would last longer than any punishment. Mark prepared to leave the country sooner than planned. He avoided crowds and kept his head down. He realized that his name would always be tied to that moment in the square. The memory followed him like a shadow. Leo stood once again at the gate under the bright sun. Tourists still gathered and took photos. Some nodded at him respectfully. Others whispered words of praise. Leo remained focused and calm. He understood now that silence could speak louder than words. He understood that strength did not always require action. He felt proud of the man he had become. As the palace gates stood tall and unmoving, Leo continued his duty. The lesson of that day settled deep into the hearts of many. And though the world moved on, the memory of quiet dignity remained powerful. The days after the incident passed quietly inside the palace. Life returned to routine, but something unseen had changed. The guards walked with the same discipline but carried deeper pride. Leo continued his duty each morning with calm focus and steady breath. He no longer thought about the tourist or the crowd. He focused on the meaning of service. Visitors still arrived from around the world. Many came with respect and curiosity. Some whispered about the guard who never moved. Some parents pointed at Leo and told their children about self-control. Leo remained silent and still through it all. Inside the palace, Paul prepared a small ceremony. It was not meant for cameras or crowds. It was meant for truth. He believed quiet honor was stronger than loud praise. He invited a few senior officers and trusted guards. One evening, Leo was asked to attend a short meeting. He followed the same hallway as before with steady steps. His heart beat calmly this time. He felt no fear. Paul stood at the front of a simple room. He spoke clearly and slowly. He thanked Leo for his service and restraint. He said the palace stood because of people like him. Paul presented Leo with a modest badge of honor. It was small but meaningful. It symbolized discipline, courage, and respect. Leo accepted it with both hands and bowed his head. No applause followed. No cameras flashed. Only quiet nods filled the room. Leo felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew this moment mattered more than public praise. Outside the palace, Mark boarded his flight home. He sat by the window and watched the ground fade below. His thoughts were heavy and restless. He replayed the moment again and again. He thought about Leo's still face and silent strength. He realized the guard had power without words. Mark understood that his wealth had failed him. He felt regret settle into his chest. Back home, Mark faced consequences. Business partners questioned his judgment. Friends spoke less often. Invitations stopped arriving. The world that once welcomed him now watched him cautiously. Mark began to change slowly. He read articles about respect and responsibility. He avoided public attention. He learned the value of restraint through loss. At the palace, Leo continued standing at the gate. Seasons changed and time moved forward. New guards trained beside him. He shared lessons quietly through example rather than speech. Tourists still tested limits but never crossed lines again. Officers maintained calm order. The palace stood peaceful and dignified. One morning, a young boy stood near the barrier and looked up at Leo. The boy smiled and saluted playfully. Leo did not move, but his eyes softened slightly. The boy walked away smiling proudly. Paul observed from afar and felt content. He believed the lesson had reached beyond the palace walls. He believed dignity had won. Leo returned to his quarters after his shift. He placed the small badge carefully on his shelf. He sat quietly and reflected on the journey that brought him there. He felt gratitude for his training and upbringing. He knew challenges would come again. He knew patience would be tested. He felt ready. Far away, Mark watched a news segment about cultural respect. He listened more than before. He no longer laughed at rules. He carried the memory as a guide. The palace gates opened and closed each day as they always had. But those who passed through felt something deeper. Respect filled the air more strongly. Leo stood as the sun set behind the towers. Shadows stretched across the stone ground. He remained still and calm. The moment that once shocked a crowd had turned into a lasting lesson. Silence had spoken louder than anger. Discipline had shown greater strength than pride. And so the story ended not with noise or revenge but with quiet growth. The guard remained standing. The palace remained honored. And those who witnessed learned the true meaning of dignity.